All right, welcome in again. It's Off the Bench, and we have come to a new day here, and what has been a roller coaster ride with the Cincinnati Bengals so far. I got to tell you, yesterday I was a little hard in the paint on the Bengals. Yes, I do know. But I just wanted to basically lay out the way that I seen it. It's almost like if there was any chance, perhaps, that you found yourselves with blinders on, I just wanted to make sure that perhaps you knew that there was a whole other side of the aisle that this thing is a complete mess. Having said that, there they go. The Cincinnati Bengals front office, Stone, maybe they saved the day. Maybe they saved the day. Joe Flacco is just the guy that the Cincinnati Bengals needed, the guy that was also playing video games on his couch with his kids just a few years ago. How long ago was that at this point, Stone? I don't know. I think a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
I mean, he was playing Mario Kart with his kids on the couch. What a feeling that must be to be an athlete that's that good, to be able to just say, yeah, I'm good. I'm going to retire. I don't think this game's good for me anymore. I'm not good enough at it to where I feel comfortable enough continuing to try to play. And then you turn around and you're like, yeah, well, on second thought, I got these people calling me, offering me millions of dollars to come play a game again. Should I do it? And then not only do you do it, you actually warrant enough respect to get a trade. I mean, that's insane to think about how good at a sport you must have been at one time. Now, I'm not suggesting Joe Flacco's not good anymore. I don't mean it to be that overly cruel. But it just must be really, really neat to be that, I guess, for lack of a better term, respected with your craft, to be able to ask people to come out of retirement. And then not only that, you get traded for, Stone. I'd ask you your opinion. You obviously have a show at the top of the hour at 11 o'clock. I don't want you to use up too much in the chamber here. But I would say on the front end of this, Stone, I actually think that was a reasonable trade. Why not? If you think that you could just survive and advance here maybe for a few more weeks, maybe Joe Burrow behind the scenes is saying that he's feeling pretty good, feeling optimistic to come back. The one thing that we'll talk about at some point in this show is where do you have to stand in regards to your overall playoff likelihood to bring Joe back or not. And I'm not talking about Joe Flacco. I'm talking about Joe Burrow. Is Burrow a guy that you want to come back regardless because you just feel like he's already missed plenty of time in his career and you don't want him to get to a spot where he feels like he hasn't played hardly any football at all? So you're like, you know what? Just despite the playoffs, despite how the season looks, when he's healthy enough to play, we'd like him to play. We'll get into that discussion later. I guess more importantly, though, right now is it gives some hope. Is that worth a fifth-round pick? I don't know. But it does give some hope to a fan base that was asking for that. Stone, did it provide hope? Did it feel like the front office or the Bengals organization is out to try to win now?
Yeah, I think absolutely it provided a little bit of hope. Again, it's nothing to be over the moon about. This is your third quarterback. When you're in the NFL and you're on to your third quarterback, you're in a tough spot. But when your third quarterback's Joe Flacco and he's had all the success that he's had, I think it could be a lot worse. But my feelings today are very similar to my feelings yesterday when we went live right when this news broke with Craig Sandlin and Reed Mouse, of course. And we all were sitting there going, you had to make a move. You couldn't just continue to go out there and roll Jake Browning out on the football field because it was an absolute and total disaster with him at the quarterback position. Now, is Joe Flacco going to be much better? We'll see. He's proven he's a lot better in the past, but behind this offensive line, of course, and a guy that doesn't exactly move around and is basically a statue, and you could argue that of all the quarterbacks in the NFL, he has the least mobility out of anybody. So there's obviously lots of questions and lots of concern going in, but I do know one thing. I'm more intrigued and more excited to flip on the TV on Sunday and see what this Bengals team is going to look like on offense, because it kind of felt like you're looking at the schedule and we're sitting here, it's like, oh my goodness, we're only going into week 6 and we've got Jake Browning the whole rest of the way, and it's going to continue to look like this, continue to look like a team that can only score 3 points in the first half over the course of the last 3 games and get beat 69-9 in the first half over the course of those last 3 games. That's not a great feeling to have. And I think the organization understood that, and they were willing to make a move, which credit to them. This is not something the Cincinnati Bengals do, make a move like this in the middle of the season. Literally, since this organization has been around, they've only made moves during the season, literally a handful of times. So I was happy to see that they recognized that Jake Browning clearly wasn't cutting it, and they took a swing. We'll see if it's a swing and a miss, but it's a swing. And at the end of the day, I think the fan base should appreciate that.
It's hard to be a swing and a miss when you only give up, one basically round of a pick in the 5th and 6th round. At that point, it kind of feels like you're throwing, darts at the dartboard to a certain extent. It's certainly, I'm not saying that you can't hit on a 5th or 6th round pick. We've seen plenty of instances in the NFL and even undrafted free agents that have gone on to have very good careers in the NFL. But more importantly, I think at least provides the fan base with some hope, which I think that's almost, it's worth its weight and whatever you paid for it sometimes, because I know that maybe it doesn't have a tangible result, and in all likelihood it probably won't have a really tangible result when it comes to the win-loss for the Cincinnati Bengals and whether or not they do something what many Bengals fans would call meaningful or not meaningful. I don't know if it's going to add up to that, but that's also why you got him. I mean, the reality is you're not going to get a piece that is probably going to make a significant difference, because if they were capable of doing that, well, they'd be employed by somebody right now that would be unwilling to trade them. So you got to take, what you can get. And Joe Flacco, for all intents and purposes, has been very serviceable. In fact, he just the other week beat this same Green Bay team that, the Bengals are going to try to go on the road and beat. We'll see if they're capable of doing it. But I guess my bigger question at this point is what is the plan for Joe Flacco? Is it that he's going to roll down what essentially is I-71 all the way from Cleveland and just come right into town, and next thing you know, he's the starting quarterback this week against the Green Bay Packers? I would openly say I think that's a terrible idea. Do I understand the sense of urgency and the fact that you can't continue to drop games, especially if you're just trying to hold over until you get to Joe Burrow? Understood. And you might be saying, well, it can't get any worse. It cannot get any worse with basically Joe Flacco over Jake Browning. It can, actually, and it just comes by the way of injury. And I know that sounds maybe a little too overly cautious, but and I get, as maybe someone that beloves the Packers, you might think this comes off as somebody that's just saying these things because I think that the Packers are better than they are. No, I'm not. I'm just saying that the Packers have a pretty good rush. They have Micah Parsons, and the truth of the matter is they've also come off of back-to-back weeks where they've been pretty humiliated. They started off 2-0. Everybody said they were going to be the Super Bowl champs. They drop one to the Browns. They tie, which was basically a win for the Cowboys, if we're being honest. But they tie to the Cowboys. They get a bye, and then the one thing that they get coming out of the bye is the offensive line of the Cincinnati Bengals. I don't know if that's a good recipe for the quarterback. Now, maybe just maybe, Joe Flacco will be fine. And maybe just maybe Joe Flacco will go into Green Bay and win. But I think the odds of winning are so low that I'd much rather give Joe Flacco a chance to get his feet underneath him, have a general clue of what's going on with an offensive perspective, and then from there, hope he can get off to a good start. And there's a belief system within that locker room that we can do it with Flacco. Or you can roll into Green Bay, try to rush Flacco out there, maybe, and again, no one hopes for injury. I'm not suggesting for a single second that's going to happen. I'm just saying it's a very much higher likelihood and possibility of it happening in Green Bay, in my opinion, than giving him a week off and letting him kind of understand the offense and then rolling him out there and giving him his best chance to be successful. Now, I don't know I guess this is where I am from a Bengals perspective and fandom that I don't quite totally understand. We genuinely think the season's still alive. Is that the sentiment around town?
I think you have to, based on the playoff picture in the AFC, not obviously based on what you've seen from the Cincinnati Bengals out on the football field. They look like an 0-5 team. I totally hear that. But when you look at the pecking order of the AFC, when you look at the division, you have to assume that there is a chance. Because, the Bengals right now are right there based on their record. I know it's a lot uglier than that. It feels a lot uglier than that, and it flat out looks a lot uglier than that. But, considering where the AFC is at right now, you have to entertain the thought that they still have a chance, because a team like Baltimore, we thought they were going to be world beaters. They're 1-4. I know you think they're going to come back and win the division. They're the odds-on betting favorite to win the division still, so you might be
after starting 1-5 too.
Right. Yeah. absolutely. And, there's other – I mean, the Chiefs are under 500 too. So, I mean, the whole state of the AFC, two of the best teams are the Colts and the Jaguars. Like, who would have thought that would be the case? So, based on what the AFC looks like, you have to sit there and say, well, there's a chance, despite the fact you look awful.
I get it. I just don't know if it's a realistic expectation to think that the way in which this roster is constructed right now that they're going to have anything worthwhile towards the end of the season without Joe Burrow. I just also ask the question is, and again, I know some people might be like, well, what are you getting at? What's the point? All I'm saying is that it feels like you're setting yourself up for real failure. Beyond what you're currently at by giving Flacco a chance to go out into Green Bay and try to figure it out. And maybe you could say, you know what, Flacco has been around this league for a long time, and I'd say, yes, he probably is going to be able to come into the building pretty quickly and pick up the offense, certainly much, much, much faster than the vast majority of quarterbacks around this league that could. And maybe I'm wrong in that sense, and I'm openly happy at least by saying that I don't really totally know the complexity of the offense of Zac Taylor, and I know some people are going to smirk and laugh and say those things. I'm just talking about more or less the language. I don't know. Maybe Joe Flacco's familiar with the language, but at the end of the day, he is the quarterback. He's the signal caller. He's the guy that's going to have to be able to make adjustments at the line of what any relatively decent quarterback would do. I don't know if that's realistic within week one. And then you, on top of that, are going into a football game that you are just very, very unlikely to win. So I think it's a bigger storyline than maybe what people would lead it up to be, because I think that there's a chance, unfortunately, and again, no one's rooting for this. I just think that there's a decent likelihood that he gets banged up in this football game if he goes out there and plays. Maybe I'm overly sensitive to the idea of Joe Flacco beating the Packers twice in like 3 weeks. And I'm trying to avoid Joe Flacco at all costs, but I just don't see it. I don't see the upside in running Joe Flacco out there. You didn't give up anything, though. I mean, realistically speaking, you gave up next to nothing. And I think it's a win for the Bengals. I do. I think it gives the fan base a little bit of hope. It gives them some optimism to at least watch for another week or two and see if things do change to the slightest degree. I also think it would be incredibly hilarious in a way is if Joe Browning. You guys got too many J's. You got Jake, Joe. It is what it is. But anyway, it'd be kind of funny if Jake did get one more shot at this, and the plan was to bring Flacco in the next week, and Jake somehow went out there and played the game of his life and threw for like 5 or 6 touchdowns, and they ended up. Maybe we'll say we lost by a field goal because I don't want them to beat the Packers, but you get the point. Then what would you do? I guess I don't want to pose that question, but it is funny because the thing is Browning has had success. I mean, you can say whatever you want. I know he's been the worst quarterback in the NFL by far. Maybe some are saying the worst quarterback in the history of the NFL the last few weeks, but he has had some success. I don't know what it is with what's happened of late. I will openly tell you it's somewhat inexplicable. I had sat here at this very desk and said that Jake Browning was a serviceable quarterback, and I still think that he is. I just think that when you have a really, really bad situation in front of you, coupled with a quarterback that loses his confidence that already isn't elite or overly talented, you find yourself in a spot where you start to play pretty bad football. And that's where obviously Browning found himself in. Now the question is it set in stone? No pun intended there. That he's going to play this week.
That's the plan. That's what Adam Schefter reported yesterday. Obviously, he passed the physical. He's a member of the team. Bengals put out a post this morning. He's going to wear number 16. They were getting his jersey already. Everybody getting excited about that. But, that's the plan for him to play against Green Bay. I think that's the right call. I totally get what you're saying. But if you go out there with Browning again, as you alluded to, what if he plays the game of his life? Well, now you're sitting there going, well, do we stick with Jake Browning even after we made this move? That's controversial. Right? And then if he goes out there and doesn't play and you get blown out by Green Bay, now you have a short week getting ready for Pittsburgh, and this is Flacco's time to go out there and shine. He loses that game. Now you're sitting there going, well, we're 2-5, and you're basically cooked, and Joe Flacco's basically cooked before he even really has an opportunity to get started. So I'm looking at this Green Bay game as an opportunity for him to get his feet wet, get back out there in the action with his teammates, understand, okay, I'm going to be the starter here the rest of the year, see what this is like, hopefully get the offense going a little bit. Do I expect them to win the game on Sunday with Flacco? No. But then you can really say, okay, we got to lock in, short week at home against Pittsburgh. And I think the expectation then is that you can go out there and compete in that football game and potentially win that football game, pick up your third win, and then kind of go from there. But I just think when you make a move like this, if you're going to sit around and say, oh, we'll give you a week here to get ready and, get the offense, get a better understanding of the offense before we set you out there, you're already borderline too late here at this point. I think there's a lot of people out there that said, well, maybe you should have made a move right when Joe Burrow went down, or maybe you should have made a move coming off the heels of the Monday night performance in Denver. They waited till probably the last possible second to do it. I don't think they can afford to wait again and roll Jake Browning out there. It's time to turn over a new leaf. It's time to put a new quarterback out there. But I hear you, right? He's 40 years of age, doesn't move, lethal pass rush for Green Bay. It sets up like, he's going to take some serious shots. And as a 40-year-old, who knows if he'll be able to withstand them. I totally get that. But I just think it's time. I think it's time now to roll him out there and see what you have. You made the move for a reason. There's some energy back in the city and the locker room, and that energy is just taken away if you just roll Jake Browning back out there again. You got to at least see what you have. You made a move. It was aggressive. It was a swing. Go out there and see how it looks.
Well, the thing is that Jake Browning did, as far as the folks are going to say they should have made a move as soon as Joe Burrow went down, the reality is that Jake Browning came in the game, and whether he made some mistakes or not, he did lead them down the field to beat the Jaguars for the only time this year. That's the only loss that Jacksonville has is from the Cincinnati Bengals, oddly enough. So it's tough for me to sit there and be like, well, you should have had a plan. There is no plan. Like sometimes when you look at your life and there's mistakes that happen, or there's an accident or a situation that occurs, and you sit there and you're like, I should have done this, I could have done that. I mean, there are times where I think you got to sit down and be honest and just say, well, there's nothing you can do. There's nothing you can do. This is the situation at hand. There's really no other way to prepare for it than the way that we did it, and unfortunately, it just didn't work out. And that's what's happened with the Cincinnati Bengals quarterback situation. And the real issue, unfortunately, is just that this team was built around that position. I mean, that is what it is. And unfortunately, when you don't have the engine in the vehicle, well, it doesn't matter how nice the leather seats are. I mean, the wide receivers are great, but unless you got the engine, unless you have Joe Burrow, those are relatively worthless unless you just want to sit there and go nowhere, which is currently what the Bengals are doing. We'll see whether or not they can find a way to rally the troops. Again, Packers or not, I don't care. It's a tall task. It's a really tall task to go into a stadium that's already a tough place to play. You're already going in, I guess, limping in. And the fact is the team's pretty good, and they've had some bad football the last 2 weeks, and they're coming off a bye. My guess is they're relatively, pissed off to a certain extent. And they're willing to take it out on somebody. And we'll see whether or not they do that against the Cincinnati Bengals. 14 points is a lot. In the NFL, it's just a lot. I'm not sitting here suggesting for a single second it's going to be a 30-point game. But I don't know. I'm just hesitant to be like, this is a great opportunity for Joe Flacco to go out there and get his feet wet when it, 2 quarters in, and next thing you know, you find yourself in a spot where Browning's right back in the football game, and you never even gave Joe Flacco a chance to get acclimated. And I get it. He could, you said it. He could go against the Steelers. And next thing you know, Watt puts him out for the year, and everyone's like, well, you stuck him out there on a short week against a great pass rush, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe there's no perfect solution to this. And certainly there's not, because the perfect solution is right now sitting at home, and hopefully they can come back from turf too. What's the realistic chance that Joe comes back in what week to give them a realistic chance to get into the postseason? When does he have to be back?
Yeah, we threw this around a little bit on the show yesterday. Is it when in December? I don't know. Is there could he get here for the last 3 games of the regular season where you have favorable matchups in those games? I think that's certainly here. Let's just throw the schedule up here while we're talking about this. Could he come back? December 21st at Miami, Sunday Night Football. I think that is kind of a realistic time in which you could come back. We threw around Baltimore on the 14th. That still feels a little bit early, but I think best case scenario, I'm willing to sit up here and say December 21st, Miami, Arizona, Cleveland. I think that's best possible scenario for Joe Burrow. And that's kind of something that we floated around yesterday was this move that Cincinnati made, did they make it knowing in the back of their mind that, okay, Joe Burrow, things are progressing in a positive direction, right? He had the surgery. It went well. He's in a spot where he's beginning his rehab process, and we feel good about him potentially making a return. And I think that is, very critical there as well. Obviously, people are going to speculate online. All the Twitter doctors are going to come out and say, well, he's going to come back at this time. The Bengals are going to keep it close to the vest, obviously, as they should. But maybe I'm just being overly optimistic here, but if they were in a situation where they didn't think there was a chance that Joe Burrow could come back this season, I don't think they'd make this move. They probably just ride it out with Jake Browning and see what they can do, see if he can get better, and if he doesn't, it's on to 2026 and we keep it pushing. But making a move like this, having the aggression to bring in a guy, give up a draft pick, something that you don't do as an organization, shows me that I think they believe that there is a chance that Joe Burrow could in fact come back. And I think that's something to be optimistic about if you're a Bengals fan. Again, we don't know that. Maybe I'm just being overly optimistic, but I don't think they make that move if they think his season is for sure done at this point.
We're going to do buy or sell in real time, so I'm not privy to the questions beforehand. But
Yeah.
So I apologize if this is part of the buy or sell. But at what point does Joe come back or doesn't come back? Like, do you feel like that as a fan base and or perhaps just an outsider, it doesn't matter who you are, what's the sentiment of Joe? Like, do you want him to come back for the last 3 games if they're relatively meaningless? Do you want him just to come back regardless because you're like, you know what, we need him to play? Is there an overall sentiment that you feel like the fan base would have with that? Maybe we make that the poll. Let's just make that a poll question of the day. Why not? Yeah. Is that if the Bengals are out of playoff contention, Joe is healthy to play the last 3 games, should he play or should he not play? Now, he's not going to be able to type that all into the poll question, so maybe it's just simply put, if Joe's healthy with meaningless football, should he play? Yes or no? I think there's reasonable arguments on both sides. Certainly you don't want to find yourself in a spot where you go into another season questioning whether or not what you thought you had is worthwhile, because another key point in this whole thing is that are we sure, and it's just completely unfair to expect after a game and a half basically what Joe Burrow was available for, is it fair to try to judge whether or not the offensive play calling or style is suited to continue to be successful with Joe Burrow and the folks? Because let's face it, they have. I don't want to say the offense as a whole was disappointing at times, but you couldn't ask for a better season out of Joe Burrow. I mean, he was quite literally, I don't want to say almost perfect, but he was unbelievably good, and you yet still found yourself in a spot where you were incapable of winning football games. And then some people are going to say, well, that's because of the defense. Well, I also think that at times they can go hand in hand. If you can't run the football and you can't control the clock, you're not putting your defense in the best position to be successful. Like there's a reason that many football coaches talk about complementary football. And there's a reason, and not to jump into too many different areas, but there's a reason in college football why guys like Lincoln Riley have never had really that great of defenses, and it's not just because they don't have great players. If you don't think that Lincoln Riley had great defensive football players at times, you'd be wrong. But the truth is, it's hard to play defense when you have an offensive style like Lincoln Riley's of the world, like the Chip Kellys of the world. It's very, very difficult, because if your offense can't control the ball and be able to burn some clock, it makes it difficult to be able to have to run out there time and time again, and eventually you get worn down. And it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to stay from a stamina perspective fresher on an offensive side of the football than it is on defense, because you're very reactive from a defensive perspective, and on offense, obviously, you have the ability to know where you're supposed to run and when you're supposed to be there. It's a lot less, in my opinion, mentally taxing. So I guess that's the question: is should he come back or should he not? If it's not a buy or sell, I don't know if it is, but if it's not one, do you have an opinion on that? Last 3 games, you can't make the playoffs. You honestly, at that point, probably have a chance to be arguing whether or not you should win games in the first place, because you want to get a better draft pick. What's your opinion on that, Stone?
Yeah, I just threw the poll question up, so make sure you guys vote if you have not done so already. But yeah, to me, it's you got to be in the thick of it, and you have to have a realistic chance of being in the postseason for him to come back. Again, we don't know exactly when he could come back, so we don't have to argue about it. We'll just say the last 3 games, like we mentioned earlier. And look, I don't want it to be a situation where Cincinnati has to win their final 3 games, and then this team needs to lose to this team. They're allowed to tie against that team, but then that team needs to be that team. The final 2, no, we don't need to be doing all the math like that. The Bengals need to be in a realistic chance where they can make the postseason if Joe Burrow were to come back. I don't want him in a spot where, certainly if they're eliminated, no reason for him to come back. Just, we'll see in 26. Get better, get healthier, and go from there. And even if it's in a spot where it's a real long shot, and it's like, well, they're not mathematically eliminated, but they technically have a little bit of life, probably don't want to force him back there as well. Because the thing about Joe Burrow is some of these injuries that he has suffered, they're borderline unprecedented. I mean, for a quarterback in the NFL to have the wrist injury that he had, doesn't happen much. It was the only time at the professional level that a quarterback had that wrist injury. And then here with the turf toe, yeah, everybody has a turf toe. That's a pretty common thing. But the grade 3 where he needs surgery and he's going to miss, such a large chunk of the season, that's borderline unprecedented for an NFL quarterback there as well. I think the last team this organization and this team wants is him to rush back, hurt it again, and that potentially impact his ability to play winning football in 2026. So, I mean, Joe Burrow, he put out a post a week or so ago basically saying, see you soon, and I think that made a lot of people optimistic that, hey, he wants to come back this year, and I definitely do think he wants to come back this year, and he probably, again, I don't know Joe Burrow, obviously, but I would think he would want to come back even if they're eliminated just because he likes to play football, and he feels like he should do that as the leader of the team. But if they're in a spot where the postseason isn't a realistic opportunity, I think he should just sit it out and go from there. And it seems like most people in the chat have that same opinion as well. As 82% of the people are saying if the Bengals are eliminated from the postseason, no reason in the world that he should come back.
I think that seems to be like the obvious choice, but at the same time, for a guy that's not been able to stay on the field, and for, I guess, all intents and purposes, you probably just trust the fact that if Joe Burrow is healthy, he doesn't really need the reps to begin with. That's fair. And I'd also say the draft pick's probably more important than all of the things that we're talking about, because at the end of the day, this is what this league is built upon. The NFL is 100% a draft-oriented league. If you can draft well, you're going to have a good football team. And development and all of those types of things are very, very nice, and you can say that you take pride in being able to develop players. Well, the truth is that if you can just draft really, really, really good players that fit your system and you're incapable of just plugging and playing, then you have a good organization. And that's really been the miss, unfortunately, for the Bengals as of late, in my opinion, is that they hit on some draft picks throughout if you want to call those a couple years ago the golden years or whatever term you'd like to use. They hit on some players. They also brought in some guys from the outside that actually played very, very well, some rental players, and you had the recipe for success. Unfortunately, that's just not happened of late. You brought in some players that really weren't great, but you thought they were going to fill a role or fill a need on the offensive line, and they just haven't been good enough. Like Orlando Brown Jr., he's just not good enough right now. I mean, does it mean that he can't maybe come back to his old self? No, I'm not suggesting that he can't. But there's a reason to why the offensive line looks the way that it looks, and it's because you've invested money into something that unfortunately is just nowhere close to being worth what you're paying them. All right, we have buy or sell today.
Yep.
I'm looking forward to this. You said that there's two football,
two baseball, 2 Bengals, 2 Reds, and then a MLB postseason one there as well.
Let's do it then.
Yeah. Here we go. First one, we're going to stay on Joe Flacco. Obviously, we got to talk about it. Can he keep this team afloat? We've kind of, obviously talked about him at length, kind of danced around this. But in your opinion, you buying or selling this?
What's a float? What's a float? Let's start there, because I think that you just said you don't want Joe Burrow to come back if there's this crazy mathematical way that the Bengals will have to make the postseason. So are we talking 10% or less? Are we talking 20% or less? So as far as the postseason odds, because we just watched the Cincinnati Reds make the postseason from 1.8% chance, which was obviously a miracle. And whether or not people want to admit that or not, I don't care. But at the end of the day, what is a reasonable thing to call a float?
I would say a float, when we look at the schedule here, is at 500 or a game below 500 going into Miami on December 21st. Because there's a real possibility that 9-8 wins this division.
Yeah, I listen. I know that I'm going to be the hated guy. I don't see it, man.
Yeah.
I don't see it. I don't know how in the world that. And I really respect the people that are staying with it. I really do. I don't know. I mean, I understand. Maybe there's no alternative. Maybe there's real. What else are you going to do? I mean, I love one football team that plays on Sundays, and sometimes they play on Mondays, and now they play on Thursdays, and if they're playing on Christmas, maybe Fridays, and whoever knows else. Before it's over, Roger Goodell have you playing every week. But you get my point. I just maybe you don't have another choice, so you just choose the optimistic route, and that makes sense to me. I understand that thought process, and at some level, right? You're like, well, who gives a damn? It can't get any worse, so I'm gonna hope and pray and give myself a chance every week to believe that they can stay afloat. I don't know. Like I know this sounds crazy to say, and I think that certainly people are going to think I'm a hater now. I think genuinely, Stone, if they even had Joe Burrow, they would be fighting for the division. I think that's how bad this roster is. I mean, I don't know if people understand that this roster is so bad that I think right now, I was looking through the schedule, the Jets, based off the ESPN win factor probability, are favored to beat them. So I don't know. I just, like, if you strip all of it away, I don't see it. But my answer, unfortunately, is sell.
Yeah. It's tough, especially after having not seen him play yet for this team, right? I mean, I think if he plays against Green Bay, we'll have a better chance at really answering this question truthfully. For now, I'll buy it, right? Look, things have been so bad for this team over the course of the past couple of weeks. I think he gives you some reason to be optimistic with the Cincinnati Bengals. And the biggest reason that I'll buy this for now, and let me be very clear, I'm not confidently saying, oh, this is a buy. This is me just going, I don't know, but I'll be positive and take the buy here in this situation. When you look at what Jake Browning has done, and I get it, man, this team, there's holes all over the place. The defense, I mean, people aren't really banging on the defense because the defense is kind of hung in there to some degree, but the defense ain't good, right? The offensive line obviously is horrible. The coaching staff, they can't out-coach anybody. The team constantly looks unprepared. They're turning the football over. They have penalties. I get it. It's more than just the quarterback, but Jake Browning has been just gosh awful at the quarterback position for the Cincinnati Bengals. Just absolutely putrid.
That's where the hope lies. The hope lies that Jake Browning has been so bad.
Yes.
He's been so bad. If you put any other living creature behind quarterback right now, we might actually not lose by 40.
Yes.
We might actually be competitive.
Yes, that's what I'm going with here.
Okay.
And look, Joe Flacco, he was great in Baltimore. He's played good football throughout the course of his professional career. He's never had a receiving core like what Cincinnati has. Like, this is the best that he's ever had to work with. So if I'm Joe Flacco, I'm 40 years of age, and it's like, that offensive line. But he's got to be a little bit excited. Like, I get to throw to Jamar Chase. I get to throw to T. Higgins, Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, Chase Brown in the backfield. There's pieces there offensively. Unfortunately, there isn't an offensive line to protect him. And unfortunately, the head coach and all the coaches really haven't proven that they're better than any other coaching staff in the National Football League. So I'll buy this for now. I understand that's probably being a little bit overly optimistic, but until he gives me reason to sell this, I think we have to understand that, all right, the team's going in a different direction. We got to step back, kind of put the previous 3 weeks to the side and say, all right, let's reevaluate the Bengals now with Joe Flacco. We'll have a better answer if he plays Sunday next week. If it still looks just as bad, then we'll probably continue to sell this, but for now, I'll buy.
Yep, that's fair. I am with you, and I also think that there's a bigger talking point that we'll get to here in just a bit about Zac Taylor with Joe Flacco, and I think that realistically speaking at this point, Joe Flacco is going to shed a pretty bright light on what is Zac Taylor. We'll get to that in a little bit. Go ahead with the second one.
Well, we're getting to it right now. Zac Taylor will set Joe Flacco up for success. Do you think he has the ability to do that?
Well, here's the thing. I actually think this is a very, very, very deep conversation to have, because ultimately what has happened now is Pandora's box has been opened, and Joe Flacco comes from the outside world who's had a lot of success regardless of whatever the situation was in Cleveland. He knows he has been around this league for a very long time, and my guess and my hope would be that there would be someone smart enough in the Bengals organization to really pull Joe Flacco aside when this is all said and done and listen very intently on what he has to say about maybe the situational awareness and or the play calling or the overall kind of concept that is this Bengals offense with Zac Taylor, or the just just the overall, I guess, vibe or the belief system that he would have in Zac Taylor. Now, does that mean that you're going to make your entire franchise decision whether or not Joe Flacco says he likes Zac Taylor or doesn't like Zac Taylor or thinks he's the right man for the job? No. But it certainly should be a pretty big decision maker, a part of that process. If there was a board of folks that I would put on the board to figure out whether or not I was going to hire or not hire, but fire Zac Taylor or keep him around, Joe Flacco at the end of this year would be a pretty big one of them. I do understand that Joe Burrow, for all intents and purposes, is the one that many people think should make all the decisions. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that you can ask a guy that's his job is to go out and perform on the football field to also play general manager, which I hate to say it, but I do feel like at times this organization has bent their knee a little bit to whatever Joe Burrow has wanted. Whatever he's asked, they seem to have gone and done. And I'm not saying that they've made a mistake yet. I'm not sitting here saying that Joe Burrow should have never wanted Jamar Chase. He should have never wanted T. Higgins. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying at some point, someone has to be the person that says, you know what, this is what the best for our football team is, despite what everyone else thinks. This is what we have to do. And I think that Flacco is going to be able to understand that. As far as setting him up for success, I think that has already been that light has already been shed a little bit. And the answer for me is not totally. Now, I will openly say, I think that, to be fair to Zac Taylor, you don't totally know the trust that he had in both quarterbacks. And I know it sounds crazy to say, but I know this. If you ask Joe Burrow to do some things that maybe he's not comfortable with, let's say whether it's being under center, whether it's being able to roll out to a certain side after a play action, I don't know the types of things that maybe go on behind the scenes that Joe Burrow might be saying, hey, I don't really like that. Let's scratch that. I don't feel comfortable with that. What is Zac Taylor going to do? Have you seen Zac Taylor's record without him? He's going to bend the knee to Joe Burrow too. And now you can say that that's what they should do, and maybe you're right. But my point in saying all that is that at some point Zac Taylor has to have his own identity here. And he's going to have to find a way to be able to script plays up to get guys open and let the quarterback have enough time based off the resources that are available to him. If you don't have a lot of time, your offensive line isn't very good, well, then you got to scheme something up, Stone, that gets the ball out of your hand relatively quick. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if it's almost like there's been this, in my opinion, there's this cookie cutter approach with Zac Taylor a little bit where this is what we do, this is how we do it, this is who we are. Despite the situation, we're going to do it this way. And I will say, I didn't feel like it was like that when the first time Browning kind of came in the fold, right? They used his athleticism. They did some bootleg play action passes. They got him outside the pocket. They let him get kind of, in my opinion, be able to showcase what his best asset is, which is athleticism. I don't know if he's not a great thrower of the football, obviously. Doesn't have great arm strength. He's not like, obviously, Justin Fields either, where he's the most insane running back in the entire league that just happens to play quarterback. But the answer at the end of the day is, unfortunately, I think I'm in the middle. I'm gonna cop out and say maybe.
Yeah, that's kind of how I feel too. I mean, I kind of put myself in a corner here because I can't buy the previous question and then sell this because that wouldn't really add up there in that regard. So I guess I'll buy this for now. Something that we've talked about a lot with Zac Taylor is just the lack of creativity. When's the last time you've seen this Bengals offense do something and you go, oh, wow, that was a really creative play. Like, he really schemed that open. You see it with your guy, LaFleur, all the time. Like, they seemingly have guys running wide open at some point throughout every single game. And that's just coaching brilliance right there. You never see that with Zac Taylor. He's so reliant on, Joe Burrow will, be able to overcome what breaks down in front of him and make a spectacular play. And unfortunately, that's what this offense has been predicated upon throughout the course of certainly the Zac Taylor and the Joe Burrow era as well. But I will say, when you look at some of the situations in the Detroit game last week, and look, I'm not some film nerd, I'm not qualified to be doing that, but I just seen some of the clips on some of the interceptions that Jake Browning threw. There are guys that are open, and it's him trying to force stuff and him making bad decisions with the football. There are answers there that Zac Taylor gave him that he was not able to take. I think with Joe Flacco coming in, he will be able to take those answers. It's a guy that's played a ton of football at an elite level. He's an older guy, obviously, 40 years of age. He's seen a lot, and I think he'll understand what to do with the football. Oh, I'm under siege right now in the pocket. Let's check it down. Oh, I've got some time here. First guy's not there. Let's go to the second guy. Let's work through the progression. Oh, I'm running out of time. Nobody's open. Let's throw it away. You didn't see those kinds of things with Jake Browning. I think Taylor will be able to put him in a position where he can have some success, but being able to like outcoach another team. Like, when have you really felt like Cincinnati's been able to do that? Or like, oh, you're going up against a good defense coordinator. That's all right. We got Zac Taylor. He's going to scheme up some brilliance. You don't ever feel like you're in that situation with Zac Taylor. That certainly is very unfortunate. But getting back to the first point that you made, I think that's incredibly well said. When this run with Joe Flacco here is done, I want to know what Joe Flacco thinks of the Cincinnati Bengals football coaching staff, organization. I probably know what he's going to think about the organization, but just the coaching staff and what they're doing from a perspective on offense. Because I think he's going to be fully transparent with you. Like, let's not kid ourselves here. Joe Flacco's not going to be with this team next year, so he's got no reason to, not be honest with what he's going to say. And I'm very interested to know what he's going to say, because if he's like, yeah, just, at the other places I've been, the coaching's been at a certain level, and here it's just kind of, they don't really have a plan. The team's unprepared. That's a massive red flag for me. And then maybe you need to move off a Zac Taylor. Until somebody that's been around the team says those kinds of things, I'm not really going to be convinced that you need to for sure move off Zac Taylor, because the people in the building have remained very loyal to him. All right, maybe that will end here if they continue to get blown out here. But you've never really had players that leave and say, oh, Zac Taylor's a clown. He doesn't know what he's doing. That's never really happened. And I think that's something Zac Taylor's been able to hang his hat on. But here with this Joe Flacco experiment and how it works out, I think can shed some light onto what Zac Taylor is truly like as a play caller and as a head coach. And I'm intrigued about what that's going to look like.
Well, Zac Taylor's always had a scapegoat, in my opinion. He's always had an out. I mean, the reality is that if you don't have your starting quarterback, it's easy to say, well, this is why we didn't have success. Everybody points to the record that Zac Taylor has without Joe Burrow, and some people who are like, well, that's just because you have a elite quarterback that's not available. What do you think you're going to do with the backup in the first place? And then you have a whole other set of crowd that's going to be like, well, obviously you'd like to think that the record could be a little bit better. You have an issue of either one of two things there. One, you have the ineptitude of being able to find different creative ways to be able to find ways to win football games, or your roster is just so bad that you can't go without one guy. Now, to be clear, let me say this. I don't think for a single second you can go and win a Super Bowl or you can go win anything reasonable in the postseason without your guy, without your star. I mean, yes, I guess you could say that the Eagles did it and be like, oh, yeah, well, look, they had Nick Foles. He was a pretty damn serviceable quarterback. If you don't think that's what Jake Browning is, then I completely would understand. He doesn't look like that right now. But at the same time, this roster build versus what the Eagles had is just completely different. And that's where I guess my thing would be, that would be the most disheartening thing for me as a Bengals fan if I was one. Is that, yes, it sucks that Joe Burrow went down. But we can't look this bad. There's just no way in the world that a roster that was supposed to go and maybe win a Super Bowl, and maybe I'm being a little overzealous by saying that, but I genuinely think that if you ask most Bengal fans, do you think you can win the Super Bowl this year? The answer was going to be yes, and most people the answer is going to be yes because we have Joe Burrow. I get that. So if we need to strip him away from the roster, that becomes null void. But at the same time, I don't think you could have you could have the best quarterback in the world, Stone. And if you take that quarterback away and the roster still isn't capable of winning 5-6 football games, then you never really had a roster, in my opinion, that could have won the Super Bowl in the first place, because your quarterback isn't going to mask all of those issues. So right now, at the end of the day with Zac Taylor is this. And my thought process has always been to defend Zac Taylor to a certain extent, because at the end of it all, he did take him to a Super Bowl. At the end of the ball, he did take him to back-to-back AFC Championship games. He's got more playoff victories as a head coach than I don't know what. Maybe the rest of the coaches combined. I really genuinely don't know that stat. But my main message is that he's had some success, yes. But where's the line in the sand when you're incapable of being able to be successful unless everything goes perfectly according to plan? And I just don't think that the value, most of the time within a free sector and an open market, you can find somebody's value by simply saying this. If they were to leave and they put their resume out there for the world to have, how many people would want to take them in the same position that they're currently at? How valuable are they? genuinely speaking, if Zac Taylor right now were to be let go, would there be rumors? Would there be people asking, hey, Zac Taylor, next year we might be able to get him. The Bengals decide to let him go. You know that answer, and so do I. I'm not trying to be overly critical or say that Zac Taylor isn't worthy of the NFL job, because I genuinely think that there's still time to be said on whether or not that's true or not true. But I know this, and you know this too. There's about 12 to 13 coaches in this league right now that if they got fired or something happened, well, somebody else would take them in a heartbeat. You've already seen it throughout the league of guys bouncing back, or they get let go here and they get another opportunity there. Maybe Zac Taylor would be calling plays next year if he got fired. Maybe he would be. My guess is that there's a good chance he'd become an offensive coordinator yet again, possibly. But would he ever get another NFL coaching job or an NFL head coaching job ever again? I don't know. And I think ultimately, like, that to me should shed a little bit of light on the situation that is currently at hand for what is a window. Which means me to the last thing that I'd like to say right now about the Bengals is this. Can we put down this narrative that there aren't windows in the NFL? That there aren't little short snippets of time, 2 to 3 years, that you have a roster build that you think you have a good chance in? And instead of sitting there always acting like, you know what, this isn't really towards Joe Burrow at all, because I like the confidence of Joe Burrow, and I think that's the mindset that every quarterback should have with the window is my career comment. That's perfectly fine. I have no problem with that statement. The problem I have is the behind-the-scenes stuff of acting like you're going to be able to figure out a way to have a sustainable dynasty the same way that the Chiefs have kind of had that and the Patriots have had that. That's the exception. It's not the rule. Like, the reality is that you don't have that, especially, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but especially for an organization that has had the utter collapses and disasters that this organization has had. Go for it. Next time the Bengals have a decent roster again and they have Joe Burrow at quarterback and there's an opportunity to go out and get a piece or two, if it means you got to trade your first-round pick, you do it. Because you know what? You don't hit on those half the time anyways unless you got a top 10 pick. I remember a couple years ago saying, you know what? You got all these chances to go out and maybe make another big splash of trying to get somebody that could get you to a spot where you feel really, really good to get to the postseason. And it was always, no. That's not what good teams do. That's not what good teams. Okay, well, at the end of the day, where you find yourself now? Zac Taylor, this is it for me. This is it. I know it sounds crazy to say, and somehow Joe Flacco is the guy, but this is it. If you can't just go out there and be competitive, take the record stuff and throw it out the window. I'm not even talking about the record. Should they be competitive this week? Probably not. But moving forward in your own division, that everybody's saying that's the only real reason that we want to go and try to find somebody that can help us win is because our division is so bad. Well, then go and prove it. Show me why your division's so bad. Win a couple games when you don't have Joe Burrow. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. And I'm waiting to see that. And if you can't do that with Zac Taylor, then guess what? I'd like to think that you could probably go find somebody else that might even take this whole... Imagine this. What if the Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins recipe is so lethal that you never even imagined how good it is? You've been hamstrung for years and years by ineptitude. Or perhaps Zac Taylor's the greatest play caller in the world and somebody else comes in and you guys are average with those players. Which of the two do you think might be true? That's the question I have. And I think that if you answered it honestly, you'd probably know where I'm going to go at the end of this year with Zac Taylor if he's incapable of being competitive. If you can't be competitive, there's too many other options out there that are great options to continue to roll the same song and dance out there and think that it's going to change. It's just not going to happen. So I don't see it. Obviously, I know that you're a Zac Taylor guy, but you can't continue to have bad result after bad result when one player goes down and think that somehow he's not a merchant to one guy. Yeah,
if he keeps getting blown out, I mean, they got to make a move. You're right. We don't, wins and losses, fine. I mean, you would like to think they can beat the Jets and beat the Bears, but, I'm not going to bang on him for that too much with his third quarterback. But if they're continuously getting blown out, the effort becomes an issue, losing the locker room, at that point, you might actually have to make a change at that position. But we'll see. Only time will tell. Before we get out of here, I do want to spend some time talking about the Cincinnati Reds. Obviously, Nick Krall, Brad Metter, they met with the media, kind of had their end-of-the-year press conference as they begin to set the budget and turn the page towards 2026. And the big kind of takeaway there was a couple of things, obviously. Ellie probably staying at shortstop. Maybe we'll keep that for a different day. But one of the big takeaways was that the entire coaching staff for Terry Francona is invited back. And my takeaway was, I was happy that they made the postseason. I thought that was something worth celebrating, but it would be a tremendous mistake if they just said, all right, let's roll it back with this same group and hope that all these guys are going to take a step in the right direction, and that will allow us to be competitive in the postseason. I don't think that is the case whatsoever. I do think there's some additions that need to be made and some changes that need to be made, but what is your reaction to them inviting all of the coaches back? Is that a mistake? Are you buying or selling that?
Well, I've always felt like this is kind of, I guess, putting me out there on an island of never being able to go back and say that I guess I could change my mind, but I just don't think coaches are that big of a deal. I don't think they are. I do think that there are philosophies that could spread without a clubhouse with young players, and when you don't have any veteran leaders to be able to kind of be the sounding board on those types of things, maybe that can bleed into situations where Noel V. Marte would bunt with two guys on in a one-run game. But outside of that, the whole Chris Valaika thing, maybe I'm wrong, and I'll openly say that there's a chance that I could be wrong, but I just don't think that it's not worth the amount of attention that it gets. You need better players. You need better players. At some point, you got to go get better players, and they don't have enough of them. And that's the question that I have. There's a CBA that's going to happen in 2027, and I think there's going to be at least a little bit of a shutdown in baseball. How long? I don't know. How those contracts will be handled, I don't know. The uncertainty of all that, maybe that makes it to where the Reds or the small market teams won't spend any money, but the truth is they have an opportunity to go out and make a splash for two big names, and some people are going to think that I'm being unrealistic by saying they can go and get both of them, and maybe I am. But at the end of the day, if you want to be a real reputable, I would even say, like, you got to understand your window. If this past season didn't prove that you have a window here, then I don't know what did. You had an inept offense. You had a shortstop to his standards that didn't I didn't think he played well defensively, obviously. I think he can get a lot better defensively. He's already shown that he's a better defensive player than he was this past season, so that could get better. You had nobody that played second base all year that was worth a damn. You had corner outfield spots at times that was like musical chairs. You had a center fielder that played, relatively decent baseball that, could be back if you'd like him to be back, I guess, depending on whether or not you think he's worth his arbitration number. You have a catcher that many people think is at least an average or an above average catcher in the league. And you have arguably the best starting pitching staff that you've had in at least top 5 starting pitching staff in the history of your franchise history, which is the oldest in this sport. You go get big names. And I know that's putting some high praise out there, and I know that's probably asking way too much, and I don't mean it to be that way. And I'm not here to say that if they don't go get these guys that they can't find a way to get better and make the postseason, but they have a hole. Their hole's first base. Their hole's DH. The offseason acquisition to fix the lineup can't be Gavin Lux. It's nothing against Gavin Lux. Very fine player. Good Major League Baseball player. But he's not the type of guy that's going to take you from here to here from an offensive production standpoint. You preach pitching and defense, and that's fine. You pigeonhole your up-and-coming, I guess what I would call your top prospect in Sal Stewart to go play a different position because you brought Ke'Bryan Hayes to the team. And with all due respect, Ke'Bryan Hayes has the back of a baseball card, and it doesn't look very good offensively. Now, to be fair, if you believe in defense, which I do, I think he's still a very much a Major League Baseball player, and you can hope and pray that he's somewhat decent with the bat. But you can't have too many of those guys. So that's the concern I have. Can't keep running out guys that are good defensively but just absolutely inept at the plate and think that it's going to work out for you more times than not. Yeah, sure. No doubt about it. You can win ugly and this and that. And we can sit here and act like the Brewers play the same brand of baseball as the Reds did this past season. Well, not really. Not really. The Brewers were significantly better in a lot of areas. Starting pitching, we can stack up. A lot of those other areas we want to convince ourselves that we're the same at, we're not. Is it too much to ask to go get Kyle Schwarber? Maybe it is. But I know one thing, he'd feel a pretty big need at DH. And yeah, it would just cost you money. Not asking for prospects. We don't have to sell them. Just asking for money. Maybe that's too much to ask. Maybe we don't have enough money to do it. I don't know the financial situation that currently exists for the smaller market teams in Major League Baseball, and I completely understand the inadequacies that currently exist in Major League Baseball, and I will fight tooth and nail for the small markets. And then people are probably going to think I'm in a shill for the small ownership groups. I'm not trying to be a shill at all. I'm just trying to call a spade here. Trying to be honest with ourselves. Trying to say, hey, you really think that it's realistic to ask a Cincinnati Reds ownership group that lives in Cincinnati, or that has a team in Cincinnati, Ohio, to compete with the Los Angeles Dodgers, to compete with the New York Mets? And we can sit here and act like the New York Mets, oh, well, look, they only won 83 games. Yeah, they had everybody and their mom get hurt from a starting pitching perspective. If that happened for the Reds, they'd win 62 games. I mean, yeah, if all things are equal, the Mets are going to win a lot of baseball games if they can stay away from the injury bug. Because at the end of the day, they spend more money on players that are better. And that's fine. But at some point, there should be some decision-making process that helps Major League Baseball be relatively equal. And that's what 2027 is going to be all about. But as far as 2026 goes, you got Pete Alonso and you got Kyle Schwarber. People are going to laugh, but if you had both of them, is it unrealistic to expect that you should be the favorite to win the division? Maybe not. I get the Cubs are pretty solid. The Brewers just won 160 games this year. I get it. But at the same time, this team that we just watched this past season, they got in the postseason. And we can all admit that they got there for one reason and one reason only. It was off the backs of the starting pitching, and it was off the backs of what was a serviceable and good bullpen. They're going to have to do it. And I'm not interested in the idea that they got time. They have some great sustainability package. The sustainability package is here now. They got really, really, really good starting pitching. And we'll see whether or not they want to take advantage of that or not. Or we can wait for all the prospects to come up and possibly fill the holes, in which they might. And yeah, I get it's tough because when we go out and spend $13 million on Candelario next year for next to nothing, yeah, pretty big dent. Pretty big dent. Maybe it's really hard to go back and ask for your parents' money when you just blew all the money that you gave you in the first place to go get the very one thing that you're trying to get. I get it. If you're a parent, you probably understand. If your kid came and asked you for $100 to go to a theme park, and all of a sudden you realize, and 20 minutes later they come back and ask for another 100 because they said they lost the 100 before that, kind of would be hard to give them another 100, wouldn't it? We'll see whether or not the ownership group will do it. But that's ultimately, in my opinion, what's going to have to happen for them to get into a spot where I think that you could say, and I guess bar the door for this one, to get into a spot where you can say, hey, we can win a World Series. And I don't know what the point of playing is, but last time I checked, the point of playing was to try to win the World Series. Winning 83 games is cute. Winning 85 games is cute. That's all fine and dandy. But at some point, the goal is to win the World Series. And I've gone back and forth with Stone. I know we're getting ready to go to your show. We'll lead into this next. Last question I have for you. This is a buy or sell. Would you rather take the approach of like the Florida Marlins at times? And I know there's no guarantee of it, but would you rather take the approach of even maybe the Royals back in the day? And I get there about it. Would you rather have 5 or 6 years of just absolutely horrific Rockies-type baseball to have a team that you think could actually win the World Series for 2 or 3 years in a row at most?
It's a fair question. I mean, all the heartbreak and all the relevance that we've gotten from the Cincinnati Reds team, like I mean, I know it hasn't been as bad as what the Rockies have put out there and disastrous, but I don't know, as a fan personally, I could take it. I don't know if we could take it with Chatterbox Reds every single night going out there and just getting absolutely blasted. I get that you got to find a way to get to a world championship. And I think you have, a core that is in place, backed with your starting pitching, that you have the ability to do that if you make some moves, right? I mean, if you can get some guys that can put the ball over the fence, especially at this ballpark, right? It's everybody talks about, it's a hitter-friendly ballpark. Well, how about you get some hitters that can put the ball over the fence? So to answer your question directly, I don't know if I would do that, to be honest with you. If the Reds, if I had seen postseason success in my lifetime and it was like, well, we have to do this in order to get back to that point, maybe I would say yes. But really, it doesn't feel like, with this year being kind of an anomaly, that we were that far off from being a team like the Colorado Rockies, to be completely honest with you, years past.
Yeah. We'll see. I'm just at a point.
Give me a name.
Give
me a name you want. You mentioned Alonso and Schwarber. I don't know if that'd be great, but, does Tyler O'Neill do enough for you? Can he help? Not to put you on the spot, but is there somebody realistic?
I would also say I have not really invested a significant amount of time, effort, and energy into what is available in the free agent market in the offseason. But I will say openly that I think that Kyle Schwarber is a real possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
I really do. I know that. Listen. Be careful with my words. I just think that if you made a really genuine run at it and you had really good people that had the ability to be sentimental and had the ability to actually sell something in your life, go convince somebody else that it's worth doing something they didn't think they wanted to do, that's what I'm talking about. You could do it. Now, whether or not this ownership group and whether or not the Nick Kralls of the world are capable of doing that, I don't know. I'm not totally convinced. We'll see. I mean, they were able to do it with Tito Francona supposedly on his couch. Now, maybe it was just because Tito only had one option left, and he was like, you know what? Let's do it again. I don't know. I'm not downplaying it. My point in saying that is, if you really, really, really think that he could help your team, and that's the other concern I have sometimes, is that I think we try to outsmart ourselves at times, where it's like, well, we can't invest that much money into something that we don't know for sure whether or not they're going to be as productive over there. Is he going to have a slump year after he just had a monumental season? I don't know. But there's veteran leadership. There's a guy that's won at the highest levels in the biggest markets that there is. Somebody that the whole entire clubhouse would respect. And somebody that probably could help fill a huge, gigantic hole that this baseball team has had. And he just so happens to build a house in Middletown. Just so happens to have kids that are going to start school here in a little bit. Find a way. That's what I say. Find a way. Kyle Schwarber has a kid in him like all of us. Kyle Schwarber grew up the same way many of us did. He wanted the Cincinnati Reds to win meaningful baseball games. He never got to see it because I never got to see it. But if you had anything that you thought that was not possible happen to you before, more of the times than not, the reason it became possible was because you believed you could do it, and more importantly, you had something that meant more than just money that made you do it. And if you can't find a way to pull out that in Kyle Schwarber, then you shouldn't be in the position you're in as somebody that should be able to go out and try to, for lack of a better term, court people into becoming Cincinnati Reds. If you need my help, I'll do my best to help. But at the end of the day, I'm hopeful that this front office can do that. You got to find a way to pull the heartstrings of a 13, 14, 15-year-old Kyle Schwarber. And if you don't think that those exist, I would ask yourself the same question as if you were to find yourself, let's just say, for instance, you were to go to a supermarket and you didn't think you were going to spend any money that day, but somehow you found, let's just say, something very sentimental, like, I don't know, the same glove you used to have when you were a kid. Somebody wanted $30 for it and you thought it was only worth $20. You going to spend the extra 10? Probably. Kyle Schwarber's made a lot of money in his career. A lot of money. Probably due to make a lot more. But what would it mean if you came back home and you were part of one of the better teams in the franchise's history in your own hometown that you get to live in for the rest of your life? Seems like something that you'd want to be a part of. All right, Stone Shield Show is next. Hope you enjoy it.
right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. I am your host, Stone Shields. Plenty to talk about here on a Wednesday. The Bengals, of course, trade for quarterback Joe Flacco. We had a live show yesterday, kind of an emergency live show there to talk about that. That certainly was a lot of fun. Myself, Reed Mouse, and Craig Sandlin on here for about an hour and a half. Talking Cincinnati Bengals, why I think there's reason to be optimistic about this move with Joe Flacco, and we'll certainly spend some more time talking about Joe Flacco here on today's show. Got my college football top 10 here with some shakes up at the top. In the top 10, obviously Penn State, Texas lose. They are out. And Penn State no longer ranked in the AP poll. And I think, obviously those two teams have significantly underperformed here to this point. We'll talk Major League Baseball playoffs as well on today's show, as we got 4 games today. This is, kind of feels like the last great day of baseball as far as, it's throughout the day, right? You have, multiple different games that mean a ton. The Yankees, Aaron Judge, how about it? I've watched that clip of his home run probably 10 times. That is absolutely unbelievable that he was able to pull that off. And who knows, maybe that's, one thing there in a series where you could perhaps change the momentum completely, and perhaps the Yankees could take that series. We'll talk Major League Baseball playoffs a little bit. Bill Belichick, just a complete disaster in North Carolina. Spend some time talking about the state of that program. Also, Arch Manning at Texas, a guy that was viewed as, certainly Heisman Trophy guy. Heisman Trophy frontrunner. Texas was going to win the national title. He might go first overall next year. Yeah, clearly none of those things are going to be happening, so we'll break down kind of the latest on Arch Manning as well. But we do have some breaking news here at the show, as Lucas Patrick has been cleared for practice, and we'll see if he's able to make a return this week against Green Bay with Joe Flacco at that quarterback position. Patrick, of course, was brought in as a free agent this offseason. I think a lot of people were like, oh, really? That was your big move there for the offensive line? That certainly wasn't, something that got a ton of people fired up, right, getting Lucas Patrick in at that guard spot. But he goes down week 1 in that Cleveland game, funnily enough, against Joe Flacco, and it looks like he is going to be ready to make a return. Is that going to make this offensive line completely better? Let's not get carried away here, but I think you got to feel a little bit better than having to roll Jalen Rivers out there and have 2 rookies on your offensive line. Both have struggled a little bit. I think Rivers has kind of hung in there, right? Kind of who would expect that he'd be a starting guard for this team after getting drafted in the 5th round and spending a lot of his offseason at that tackle spot. But Lucas Patrick cleared for practice, barring any setbacks. I think we'd expect him to potentially go out there and play against Green Bay, which should give the new quarterback Joe Flacco an opportunity there to have an offensive line that's maybe just a tick better than what we've seen in previous weeks. Also of note, Jermaine Pratt was released earlier this week by the Las Vegas Raiders. Linebacker, obviously, longtime Cincinnati Bengal, had the amazing play against the Las Vegas Raiders in that wild card round when the Bengals finally broke through, got that playoff win and round to a Super Bowl that year. Incredible interception there on that play. Forever a Bengals legend just simply for that play. But he gets picked up and he is reuniting with Lou Anarumo. I think a lot of people thought when the Bengals released Jermaine Pratt that he was going to Indianapolis. He didn't. He goes to Vegas, gets cut. Now he's going to Indianapolis. That's a really good football team there in the Colts and a really good defense. And certainly looks like Lou Anarumo was a bit of a scapegoat to some degree. Considering some of the things that transpired, obviously, last year with Cincinnati as a defense. He's got a lot more veterans on that defense for Indianapolis, so he's always been known to have kind of a complex scheme, and with more veteran guys, that allows you to, understand that a little bit better and play better defense there. So it was kind of obvious to me, at least, that he was going to land on his feet. He's proven that he's a terrific defensive coordinator, and he's showing it again in Indianapolis, and he reunites with his linebacker, Jermaine Pratt. But let's talk about Joe Flacco. Obviously, we had the live show yesterday breaking the news. That was a lot of fun, but I think there's still some things to unpack as it relates to this. My thoughts really haven't changed on this whole situation. I think when the news broke, I immediately was like, all right, here we go. This is positive, right? This is something that is going to help this football team out. Is it going to be what saves this team and puts them in a position to go to the postseason, and Joe Burrow will be back and Joe Flacco will carry this team to that point? Let's not get carried away here, but they certainly are better today than they were without Joe Flacco. And we kind of went back and forth on this on off the bench. Trace Fowler alluded to the fact that he doesn't think it's the best idea for him to play play against Green Bay. The plan, by the way, is that he plays against Green Bay. We don't have any concrete evidence of that at this point, but Schefter reported it, and that seems to be the vibe around the team here at this point. And I completely disagree with that sentiment that he should not play. I think you made the move. It's go time. Get in there and see what you got. Again, this isn't a guy that, you signed off the street that hadn't played football in a couple of years, that needs to kind of get back in football shape a little bit, digest the offense. No, this is a guy that's been very close to football all throughout this year, and he started for the first several weeks for the Cleveland Browns at that quarterback position. Now, Joe Flacco at 40 years of age, right? Obviously, he can't move. We all know that. You could argue that of all the quarterbacks in the National Football League, he's the least mobile, and with the 30th ranked offensive line as it relates to pass rush rates, that obviously is not a good situation to be in with Joe Flacco. But he also has never been in a spot with this many weapons, which we'll touch on in a second. But as it relates to him playing against the Green Bay Packers, I just don't think you're in a spot where you can afford to sit there and say, oh yeah, you know what, take your time, get a cup of coffee, relax, right? Try to pick up this offense, do what you do, and then we'll talk to you on the short week going into Pittsburgh. You have to throw him out there because assuming you're going to lose this week against Green Bay, which I don't think, I think your chances of winning increase slightly with Joe Flacco instead of Jake Browning, but Vegas seems like they think it's a half a point difference, as it was a 14.5-point spread, and now after the news, I believe it's a 14-point spread, so not much of a better chance there. But I don't think you can afford to be in a spot where you just ease him into this. No, you made a move. You made a swing. You traded a draft pick, something that Cincinnati as an organization, they do not do. For a team like the Philadelphia Eagles, 5th-round pick, nothing. Who cares? Go do it. This is pretty significant for the Cincinnati Bengals, right? I mean, this isn't something that they typically do. It's the 4th in-season trade in organization history. The history of the organization, they've made 4 in-season trades. That's insane. They made one last year, obviously, for Khalil Herbert for a 7th-round pick, a running back to kind of come in and see what he could do. It didn't really do much, right? But they made a trade, and that's certainly out of the ordinary for this organization. All right, the skill guys that they have, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, right? Joe Flacco, all his years in the NFL, I believe he was drafted in 2008. He played with Willie Anderson, right? Willie Anderson, the guy that a lot of people think should be in the Hall of Fame, Cincinnati Bengal. How crazy is that? That just shows you kind of the age of Joe Flacco. The fact he's 40 years of age and played with Willie Anderson really is hard to wrap your head around. But if you're Joe Flacco, you got to be excited for this opportunity. Obviously, you're probably a little bit concerned behind this offensive line, but you're sitting there going, wow, I have the opportunity to come in here, be the quarterback. We're still, it's not like the team's 0-5 or 2-3. You have life. You've got a long weeks worth of games ahead of you, right? It's not like, you're going to come in here and start 3 times. No, you're going to be making lots of starts here for the Cincinnati Bengals, and you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins to throw to. I mean, that's got to really excite you if you're Joe Flacco. Obviously, you have the concerns about the offensive line. What's that going to look like? I don't know, right? Because Jake Browning, say what you want about him. We've been banging on him here, certainly at the show, and we've been banging on him for the past 3 weeks. But he has a little bit of athleticism, right? He's certainly no Joe Burrow, but he can at least move a little bit back there. Joe Flacco, there's not much of that going on. He's dropping back, he's hitting his back foot, and then he's just kind of there. and you see what happens from there. So we'll see if they can, scheme some things up, get the ball out of his hands quickly. But the one reason why you should be really optimistic is that Joe Flacco, he can make the easy play. He can hit the layups. Jake Browning was missing layups, right? There was stuff out there that as a professional quarterback, it's a short route, it's an easy read. He was failing at that. Joe Flacco's not going to fail at that. Is he going to throw the football to the other team from time to time? Yeah, I mean, he's done that. He did. Maybe that's partially why he ended on the bench. But, I mean, the reality with Cleveland was it was only a matter of time, unless they started off the season, winning all kinds of games. It was only a matter of time before they tried one of their young guys, Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders, right? It was only a matter of time. He understood that, the leash for him in Cleveland as the starter was not necessarily the longest thing in the world. And with the weaponry that he has, there's going to be an opportunity for this team to score some more points on offense. And I think that's why you should be optimistic. And as I said on Off the Bench, look, there's holes all over this football team. Joe Burrow masked a lot of these holes, right? I mean, the defense, we talked about it. Has the defense been better this year? Yes. If the offense was competent, could the defense perhaps hang in there and help you win a game? Maybe. But let's not sit here and act like this is a top 10 defense in the National Football League. They still struggle in coverage. Their DBs are still poor, and Geno Stone is still absolutely awful at that safety spot, and you still struggle to get pass rush on opposing quarterbacks. All those things are true. From a coaching perspective, all right? From a staff, top to bottom, obviously I've defended Zac Taylor on here before. It's getting harder and harder to do that each and every week as time goes on, as his team continuously gets blown out. Al Golden, I like him, but okay. Dan Pitcher, what's he proven as the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals? There's not many teams in the National Football League where you match up with the Cincinnati Bengals, and as a Bengals fan, you go, all right, we got the better staff, we're going to be more prepared, and we're going to handle the X's and O's better than the opposing coaching staff. You just don't really feel like that is the situation. So that's another hole. Defense as a whole, right? Coaching staff as a whole. Organization, right? Just winning, right? Being a winning organization, that's a whole. Drafting and developing, that's a whole, right? You've got holes all over the place. And Joe Burrow is able to help overcome some of those holes and make them look non-existent, which just speaks to the greatness of Joe Burrow. But Jake Browning was a guy that it compounded it. It made it look even worse than it even is, which is saying a lot. I'm telling you, as a quarterback in the National Football League, and you guys don't need me to say this to understand this, you're touching the football on every single snap. You're getting the ball. It's in your hands. So no matter how much turmoil there is around you and how much incompetence there is around you, you have an opportunity to make plays and overcome that. And Jake Browning certainly just made things worse. Now with Joe Flacco, he's going to be in a spot where it's like, okay, let's take the completion. There it is. Let's get the ball out of our hands quickly. Let's go through our progression. Let's read the defense. Let's throw the ball away when it's not there. Let's push the football down the football field. It is a crime that Cincinnati has Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, and they haven't been able to hit on a big play, right? Yeah, you had the one in garbage time against Detroit, but, I mean, beyond that, right, I mean, this is the team that should always be a threat to take the top off of defense. And with Joe Flacco, I think there's some elements to that he brings. Is he going to, keep this season afloat, right? That's kind of the big question we've been asking. I don't know. You don't know either. We'll see. All I know is that this weekend against Green Bay, I'm more excited to flip on the TV and watch. I'm more excited on Thursday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers to flip on the TV and say, all right, what do we got here in Joe Flacco? That didn't exist prior to that move being made yesterday with Jake Browning, because you were sitting there looking at the schedule going, oh, my goodness, we're only going into week 6, all right? There's all these games in an NFL season. We've got just games and games and games ahead of us, and we've got Jake Browning and Brett Rypien. My goodness, it was a tough spot to be in. Are you in a great spot now? Could it continue to be just as bad? Yep, that's a possibility. But you made a move, you made a change, and you absolutely needed to do that. And now you have Joe Flacco. And I've said before, as did we want Jameis Winston? Yeah, maybe, right? Was that more of a fun option, right? Does he, have a little more liveliness to him, right? Is he, a funny guy? Yeah, would he be welcomed in the locker room? Sure. Russ obviously has, won a world championship there as well. But, I mean, the fact you were able to pull this off in the division and hardly, to me, a 5th-round pick, that's nothing to me, right? I mean, you were going to pick the wrong guy in the 5th round anyway, right? So, to me, it doesn't really make any difference. To me, it feels like you got him for nothing. And the fact that you were able to do that from a division rival, that's, by the way, you still play this year. It's not like the Bengals were done playing the Browns, and you were able to get a quarterback on their roster for a draft pick, a day 3 draft pick. I mean, I think you clearly won the trade, right? I'm not quite sure what Cleveland was doing, honestly. I mean, obviously they're kind of a mess themselves, and they probably don't view Cincinnati as a threat. But, giving them, the guy that started for you the first several weeks of the year, that's pretty significant for only a day 3 pick. It's not like you had a day 2 pick. It's a day 3 pick. So I think there's reason to be optimistic as we kind of turn the page here and look forward towards the rest of the schedule. Are they going to be able to, hang in there and win football games? Can Joe Flacco keep this team 500? I'm going to struggle with that, by the way. I mean, so many Joes and a Jake as well. I mean, that's a lot of J's right there. But when you look at the schedule, are they going to be able to do that? As we take a look at it here right now. I mean, you have a situation where you go into Green Bay. That's a tough game. And then you have Pittsburgh on a short week. And then it becomes kind of do or die time. Right, because if you lose to Green Bay, which I think most people expect to happen, and maybe you can compete against Pittsburgh at home, but I don't know if you feel great about winning that, then you're looking at a spot where, you got to win the next 2 games in order to keep this thing afloat. Can Joe Flacco beat the Jets? At home? Maybe. Can you beat the Bears? At home? Maybe. And then you get the bye, and then you spin around and play Pittsburgh once again. You still have 2 games against Baltimore, who Baltimore, let's just be honest, they're not Baltimore. Yeah, Lamar might be back for those games, but it's not the Baltimore Ravens. And then you end, obviously, with Miami, Arizona, and Cleveland, and you would hope that Joe Burrow can get back by that point. But looking at this schedule, you're like, can Joe Flacco keep this team at 500? And the greatest question is, how much is he going to be able to overcome? That's the question that we all have to ask ourselves, because there's not many other changes that are going to be made. Yeah, maybe you get more of a spark, more juice in the locker room, but it's the same personnel and it's the same coaching staff. So is he going to be able to drastically improve this team from Jake Browning? And I think he will, just because Jake Browning was that bad. I mean, it's a quarterback in the NFL. I get it. I get their holes all over the place. I understand that. But Jake Browning was downright awful, right? He didn't even look like a backup quarterback. This was one of the worst stretches of quarterback performance that we have ever seen in the National Football League. And I'm not going to say Joe Flacco's even going to play good football or maybe even decent football. But if he just goes out there and plays like he did as the starter in Cleveland, which, by the way, led him to getting benched, it's going to be a significant improvement from what Jake Browning was doing out there on the football field. And that's just kind of the reality of the situation. And some people might not understand that, might not grasp that, but just the fact that this team went from Joe Burrow to Jake Browning, I mean, there is a Grand Canyon in between those two players at the quarterback position. It's just, you can't even begin to describe how far off those two guys are. And I don't just want to sit here and bang on Jake Browning, but that's just the reality. That is the reality, is those two guys are just that far off. You bring Joe Flacco in, still very far away from Joe Burrow, but the gap at least shrinks a little bit from what it did with Jake Browning. And they had to make a move. They were losing the locker room. They were losing the fan base. As a 2-3 team, that shouldn't happen, right? It wasn't like they were 0-5, even though it felt like they were. And we're going to see what Joe Flacco can do with this team. I would like to see him getting the ball out of his hands quickly. Some play action stuff. You want to go under center. Maybe see if you can run the football a little bit. Lucas Patrick coming back. Maybe that helps out. And then pushing the ball down the football field to Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. He's got to be over the moon that he gets to throw to those two guys. And, this is a guy that he can chuck it now. Is his arm as good as it once was? I don't know. Maybe not. But it's still really, really good, right? And with those guys running down the football field, there's opportunity there to score points. And the bar is not – it's not some crazy bar that needs to be cleared. If he goes out there and scores 6 points in the first half against Green Bay, that's a tremendous, dramatic improvement based on what this offense was previously doing with Jake Browning. They scored 3 points on offense in the first half over the last 3 games. They were outscored in those 3 first halves 69-9. That's not close. I have a belief that Joe Flacco will at least be able to elevate that. It literally can't get worse. Right, what's he going to do? Oh, not score points and throw 3 interceptions? Well, that's what Jake Browning was doing, so that's not any worse. That's just the same, right? And I find it very hard to believe that it's not going to at least be a little bit better than that. Now, I'm not, I've never been an NFL quarterback, obviously. I don't know how difficult it is to get, picked up by a team and, you're starting here in a few days. That's got to be really hard. And the new language, that's got to be tough, right? But Joe Flacco's been around. He's made the transition before. He's been signed off the street before, and he's played well before. And I think the Bengals are certainly banking on that being a possibility again here in 2025. We'll see. Certainly very exciting that, at least something. There's been a bit of a shakeup, right, at that quarterback spot. I mean, it looked like we were like, well, we're just going to continue to do this every week. It's going to be really unwatchable. But there's at least, some intrigue now as it relates to the Bengals and what they got going at the quarterback position. All right, it is Wednesday. That means it is time for my top 10 college football teams here on the show. We did our power rankings, obviously, yesterday for the National Football League. Those are available on YouTube right now if you didn't see them. Obviously, big shakeups as it relates to the NFL there with top teams, the Eagles, the Bills, the Chargers, the Rams, all those teams losing, and certainly some upsets in college football there as well. By the way, another incredible weekend of college football. Oregon, Indiana, banger, Red River Showdown, Texas, Oklahoma. Obviously, Oklahoma probably going to be without their starting quarterback, John Mateer. Texas has not culminated in the team that we thought they would be here, but that's still a good game. Ohio State, Illinois. ranked matchup. I question whether or not that'll actually be close, but that's a great game at noon. And also at noon, Alabama, Missouri. Nobody's talking about Missouri, and that is a phenomenal college football game there as well. But let's stick on Missouri. So I've got, we'll do my top 10, but there's 2 teams that are just barely on the outside looking in, and one of those teams is Missouri. To be completely honest with you, I really like what they've got going. They're undefeated, right? Eli Drinkwitz, he's really done a nice job there in the SEC, and it's hard for me to understand why they are currently unranked here, or excuse me, not in the top 10 here at this point. I think they probably belong in the top 10 in the AP, but I also don't have them in the top 10 in mine, so I guess that does make a little bit of sense there. But Missouri and Georgia Tech are my 2 on the outside looking in. Georgia Tech, they've got an incredible quarterback in Haynes King. He does a tremendous job, just a gritty player. They haven't lost a game there either as well, so those 2 are just on the outside looking in here at this point. But let's get to it. Number 10 here on this list for me is Oklahoma. I had them on the outside looking in last week, and they didn't do anything this week. But obviously, teams lost in the top 10, so I needed to put a team in the top 10. The AP poll has them at 6, and that defense is real. Right, that defense flies around and makes plays. Brent Venables, their head coach, he was calling the plays at one point, and then he gave up play calling on defense. Then he started doing it again. It's like, well, why is he doing that? Oh, yeah, he's really good at it. Right, you saw that at Clemson, and you're seeing it again here with Oklahoma. They've got dudes. They fly around. They fly all over the place. And the reason that I had them off is because they were without John Mateer, who before he got hurt was the Heisman frontrunner in my eyes and the best quarterback in the country. Now, there's some rumors that perhaps maybe he could play this week against Texas, which that would be very significant. There was that rumor of, he ran into some guy at Chipotle, and Mateer was like, yeah, I'm playing. Venables obviously keeping it close to the vest here at this point. We'll see. It feels early after, undergoing that surgery with his hand. But Oklahoma's a good football team. They're solid. That schedule is an absolute gauntlet. But I think at this point, especially considering the losses of Penn State and Texas, you got to throw them at the top 10. I've got them at 10 just because of the questions there at quarterback. AP has them at number 6. Coming in at number 9, I have Texas Tech. Really high on Texas Tech. That was our best bet of the weekend. Them going on the road to Houston and covering that spread, 11.5. They absolutely demolished them. Honestly, it could have been even worse than what the score indicated. They kicked some field goals in that game, had some opportunities to score even more points. But in the transfer portal era, the NIL era, usually you don't see teams that just go strictly to the portal and strictly to paying guys and totally turn over their roster and have tremendous success, which North Carolina, a great example. They're obviously really struggling right now. We'll talk about them later on in the show. But Texas Tech is doing a tremendous job. They really are. And got to give a lot of credit to their head coach, and got to give a lot of credit to Baron Morton, their quarterback. He got hurt in the game against Utah. Will Hammond came in. He was really good, but then they went back to Baron Morton, and he was really good in the Houston game there as well. They're explosive on offense. They can throw the ball. They can run the ball. They can block. Their pressure rate on defense is incredible, and they have a linebacker in Jacob Rodriguez who is an elite player, and he flies around. He's that leader of that defense. He does a tremendous job, perhaps a Butkus Award finalist guy to have an eye on as the season continues to progress. But Texas Tech is real. Clearly the best team in the Big 12, in my opinion, and clearly have a path to the college football playoff here at this point. They most definitely belong in the top 10. So those are my new additions this week to the top 10, Oklahoma and Texas Tech. And I have Georgia at that 8 spot. That's where I had them last week there as well. The AP poll has them at number 10. They whooped up on Kentucky. Kentucky, are they the worst team in the SEC? Yeah, maybe. But they handled business there in that game, responded well after the defeat at home to Alabama. Look, Georgia has their flaws. Is this the Kirby teams that went back-to-back and won back-to-back national titles? No, I'm not going to sit here and act like that is the case. That defense, obviously not as good as in years past. You have some questions with them running the football. I still don't fully trust Gunnar Stockton, despite the fact he played really well in that game at Neyland Stadium at Tennessee, and also played solid in the game against Alabama at home. But the thing about Georgia is this: they can beat any team in this country. There's a top 3 that we'll get to obviously in a second of teams that kind of have separated themselves from the pack, and even beyond that top 3, Ohio State has even separated themselves from that group of being in the top 3. But when you talk about those teams, you talk about teams that are good teams in college football, but it's like when you look at those top teams, Can they perhaps knock off a team like that? With Georgia, I think the answer is yes. I think they can go anywhere, any given week, and beat anybody. And I think that's kind of partially why I have them at that 8 spot. They've got the best head coach in the country in Kirby Smart, and they still make plays on defense despite the fact they're not maybe as ferocious as in years past. But in the age of the NIL, the reason what made Georgia and Alabama so dominant for so long is because, a guy gets hurt or a guy needs to, sub out for a play. The backups are really, really good. Well, now the backups are playing at, Minnesota or playing at, that's probably a bad example because they just got whooped by Ohio State, but they're playing at another Power 4 school that maybe didn't have a ton of elite talent prior to NIL just because, they're paying money more. Right, they're getting paid. Do you want to be a backup here or go to this other P4 school and get paid a bunch of money? And that's why you're seeing the parity come back a little bit more in college football because the top teams, their backups, aren't as good as they have been in previous years. At 7, I have Ole Miss. The AP poll has them all the way up at 4. I dropped them down 1 spot. We'll get to why in a second. They were idle this week. They did not play. But their defense is really good. I think that has been the knock on Lane Kiffin. It's like, yeah, they can score points there on offense, but that defense doesn't look like an SEC defense. You got to give Lane Kiffin a lot of credit for what he has been able to do on the defensive side of the football for Ole Miss, because when he got there, it wasn't great, and now it looks like an SEC defense against that LSU offense, which certainly has struggled this year. They were really, really good in that game. Borderline trap game, or not really a borderline trap game, a flat-out trap game this week. They play Washington State before they play Georgia. And, obviously, they played Georgia last year, had a big victory against Georgia. Lane Kiffin's teams, sometimes can they fall into a trap, look ahead a little bit? Yep, maybe. And that perhaps is a game to have your eye on. I believe the spread's like 23.5 points there. Ole Miss, Washington State. That could perhaps be a good game. But Chambliss at quarterback, they've had some questions there. They've gone back and forth, with their 2 quarterbacks. The first guy got hurt. Now Chambliss is in, a guy that played at the D2 level, won FCS national titles. And, he's been a really good quarterback for them this year, and he just makes them a little bit more dynamic on offense. Austin Simmons was their starter, and, he looked solid, and then he got hurt. Now they've got a quarterback decision to make who they'll go with. I think they'll probably go with Chambliss. I think he provides them a little bit more versatility and makes them a little bit more dynamic there on offense. At 6, I have the Alabama Crimson Tide. The AP poll has them at number 8. What an impressive victory against Vanderbilt. Obviously, they got smacked around the first week at Doak Campbell Stadium against Florida State. That was as ugly as it gets. I mean, that was flat out not competitive whatsoever, and they've done a complete 180. Kalen DeBoer's got that team playing really good football right now. They look really intense, really focused, playing physical. DeBoer's got a chip on his shoulder. You see him getting animated, getting fired up. I love that. Right, I always thought DeBoer was maybe a little bit too laid back, especially to be replacing a guy like Nick Saban, but he's flipped the switch a little bit in that regard as he's been really getting after it. You hear him screaming on the sidelines, getting into it with some of his players, getting them fired up. I absolutely love it. And Alabama, they've got lots of holes on this team. Defensively, stopping the run. Their run fits are horrible, right? Their secondary really struggles with that for whatever reason. You saw more big runs from Vandy there in the game. I'd be shocked if Missouri isn't able to pull off a 40-plus yard run in the game. That just feels like something that's inevitable at this point. But as it relates to Alabama running the football, they were pretty one-dimensional kind of coming into this Vanderbilt game. But they had some success on the ground. Getting Jam Miller back a couple of weeks ago certainly helps with that. 146 yards rushing. If they can become a bit of a more balanced attack on offense, I think that could certainly suit them well. And they could really perhaps be a national title contender. But I would argue it's the best passing attack in the country. With what they've got going with Ty Simpson and the receivers that they have, absolutely unbelievable. Bernard and Williams and picking up Horton out of the portal from Miami. That's a really good wide receiver trio there in Tuscaloosa. Now, the thing that concerns you a little bit is that doesn't always travel, throwing the football. And they got to go on the road and play Missouri. I mean, they are fully on upset alert here. Would not surprise me at all if they lost this game. Kalen DeBoer's team, since he took over, have really struggled on the road, and it's an early game. I mean, it's just kind of got upset written all over it. And also the offensive line that's protecting Ty Simpson, they've played really well these past few weeks, but it's that same group that took the field against Florida State that absolutely got punched in the mouth and didn't respond. All right, so at any point, they could go back to playing that way. I'm kind of just, that's why I fully don't trust them. Yeah, but based on what they've done, the quality of opponents in which they've beaten, and what they've been able to do throwing the football with Ty Simpson. If he continues on this path, he's going to win the Heisman Trophy. And obviously we'll see if he's able to do that. But I've got Alabama at number 6. I've got Indiana at number 5. AP poll has them at 7. They were idle, didn't play this past week. I had them at 5 last week. No reason for me to move them. Maybe I'm a little bit too high on the Hoosiers. They have a huge game against Oregon on the road. Spread 7.5. I know I'm high on them. I've got them at 5. Feels like that spread should be probably more 8.5, 9 as it relates to that game between Indiana and Oregon. But Curt Cignetti, man, you got to give him credit. He kind of, it was a great story last year, and then he was talking all that smack, and he was winning, and it was great, and then he kind of got smacked around by Ohio State and Notre Dame, and it kind of was like, now it just kind of looks corny, like, what are you doing? But there's no shame in losing to Ohio State and Notre Dame. Those are two of the best programs in the country, and all he's done since then is win as well. And let me be very clear here, this Indiana team is much better than the Indiana team last year. Mendoza, their quarterback, people were talking about Heisman with him. Curtis Rourke was solid for them at the position last year, but Mendoza certainly is a step up, and they can run the football well as well. It's a very balanced attack, and we're going to find out early in that Oregon game if they can hang around. Because that front for Oregon is real, and they're athletic, and they're big. And I'm interested to see how the Indiana offensive line performs in that game. If they can hang in there and still offer a bit of a running attack for the Hoosiers, they could hang around and potentially win that game. Oregon's really, really good, and this is obviously a massive test for Indiana, but I think they'll hang in there. I really do. I'm not going to sit here and say they're going to win, but I think they're going to hang in there against Oregon. I don't think they're going to get blown out. Oregon is really, really good, and that, that home field advantage is a real thing at Autzen Stadium. But I'm high on Indiana, and I think they deserve a lot of respect. And again, I think they're a lot better than they were last year. And if they can hang around in this game, I'm not even saying if they win, if they can hang around in this game, they're certainly a threat in the college football playoffs. At 4, I have Texas A&M. My top 4 has not changed last week to this week. AP poll has them at number 5. Slow start against Mississippi State. There's some questions there offensively, maybe, but that defense is real. And Mike Elko, he gets his guys ready, gets them ready to play. If they're in a spot maybe where they find an offense that scores some points against them, can they hang in there? I still think they can. Marcel Reed at that quarterback position. Those two receivers there, one of the best wide receiver duos. I would say probably the best behind Ohio State. So they can throw the ball. Marcel Reed, obviously, what he can do running the football as well. But that defense, to me, is kind of what stands out and why I think they're a really good team. But, they play Florida this week, and we'll see. Billy Napier, it's this kind of annual him attempting to save his job tour, right? Seemingly does that each and every year. And I don't know if he's going to be able to save it this year, to be honest with you. But that's a sneaky, really good game there as well this weekend, and we'll see how A&M performs. But I've got them at 4, and right now I have them as the best team in the SEC, but definitely think Alabama is coming for that title there. At 2, I've got Oregon, or excuse me, I skipped Miami there. Got Miami at 3. They proved against Florida State that they're a real team. All right, there was maybe some question marks on whether or not they were or not, but some of those guys that they have, Reuben Bain, he looks like he's going to go top 5 pick in the draft, edge rusher spot. He's an unbelievable football player. They've got an offensive lineman that's really good, solid offensive line altogether. They can run the football. Tony, freshman wide receiver, he's so dynamic. He's an incredible playmaker. Say what you want about Carson Beck, but he's spreading the football out. He's hitting on some shots down the field. He's making good decisions. And Miami's a real team. There are some people that say Miami's the best team in the country or even better than Oregon. I think that's ridiculous, to be honest with you. But they're clearly the number 3 team. And as I mentioned kind of at the top of this segment, Ohio State, Oregon, and Miami, to me, have kind of separated themselves from the pack, and then Ohio State has continued to separate themselves from even those 2 other teams there as well. But we'll see. Miami, they don't have many challenges on their schedule going forward, so we'll see if they can continue to play at this level or if they perhaps slip up. But for now, you got to put Miami at 3. Been really impressed with what they've been able to do. 2, I got Oregon. They didn't play. Their true freshman running back, De'Aaron Hill, he's a problem. Dante Moore, I think if the season ended today, you probably give him the Heisman Trophy. That front is really athletic. The AP poll has them at 3 and Miami at 2. I completely disagree with that. Big win for Miami. That's fine. Oregon didn't play. Oregon is a really, really good team. Dan Lanning is a really, really good head coach. Now they're back home playing Indiana. That game is so fun. That game is so fun and exciting. I think Oregon probably wins the game. Wouldn't shock me if they got upset. I don't think they're going to blow out Indiana. Oregon's really, really good. They are, but I think Indiana's going to hang in there in this game. But Oregon's good. Oregon's good, and this was supposed to be kind of a retooling year for Dan Lanning, right, because they lost a lot of pieces, but I would argue they're better this year than they were last year, and I think they have a better quarterback, and that's nothing against Dylan Gabriel, but Dante Moore's the real deal, and this is going to be another opportunity for him to show that to the rest of the country, as, at the time, the Penn State win was absolutely huge, and I still think it is, white out on the road, but then they lose to UCLA, so that win kind of loses a little bit of its value, and have an opportunity to pick up a huge win at home against Indiana. What an incredible college football game that will be. And at number 1's Ohio State. I kind of mentioned this earlier in the week. It's like you're watching them and you're like, who's going to beat this team, right? And you begin to question that. Minnesota's not good, but they absolutely smacked Minnesota at home. Nobody's scoring more than 10 points on Ohio State. We'll see if Illinois can do it this week. I don't know. I think the spread's maybe 14 or so points. That doesn't feel like enough. I don't see Illinois sticking around and hanging around and making that a close game. You look at Ohio State and you say, where's the weakness, right? In years past, there's always been a bit of a weakness, and for the longest time, it was the glaring weakness was their head coach. Well, he's not a weakness anymore. He's got a newfound swag to him after winning that national title. He's been really good this season. The defense, that was the best defense in the country last year. Newsflash, they're even better this year, and they've got a 3-time Super Bowl champion calling the shots, and Matt Patricia. And usually at the collegiate level, when you see a guy go NFL to college or back and forth, it doesn't always work out, but Matt Patricia is absolutely outstanding, and those boys are flying around making plays. You can't run the football on him. If you're a running quarterback, he can't run, right? If you're an opposing quarterback, you better get the ball out quickly because they're coming after you. That's a rebuilt defensive line, but Caden Curry, he's getting after the quarterback. They've got answers all over the place. And, I would say a weakness last year for me, at least, watching was quarterback. I didn't think Will Howard was very good at all, and he still ended up winning the national title. Well, their quarterback this year is really, really good, and Julian Sayin. And there's just no weakness on this football team, and it's hard to see looking at their schedule, which is very weak, especially after Penn State losing. It's kind of like, see you in Ann Arbor, right? They'll be undefeated rolling into Ann Arbor, and we'll see what happens. And, Jeremiah Smith obviously gets a lot of the attention, as he should, but Carnell Tate, he's a first-rounder, right? He's a first-rounder at that receiver position there as well. So they got dudes all over the place. They're playing with a lot of confidence. I don't see anybody on their schedule beyond Michigan that could even give them an opportunity to slip up and perhaps lose the game. So we'll see. To go through a gauntlet again in the playoffs, that'll be difficult. I'm by no means saying they're a lock to win the national championship at this point, but it's hard for me to imagine them losing a game before the Michigan game, obviously Thanksgiving weekend at the end of the year. But there you have it. That is my top 10. Some changes. Obviously, Bama goes up a little bit, and Texas and Penn State obviously out. Texas Tech and Oklahoma in, and then Missouri, Bo Pribula, the quarterback there for Missouri, Penn State transfer. He's playing really good, and then obviously they got a good head coach in Drinkwitz. They got a good running attack, so they're kind of just there on the outside looking in, and then certainly Georgia Tech, and then I think you can throw LSU and Tennessee in the mix there as well. All right, as always, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button. If you haven't done so already, youtube.com/chatterboxsports. We are live here every single weekday, 11 to noon, here on the Stone Shield Show, off the bench before 10 to 11. And if you ever miss the show, that's totally fine. It'll be out in podcast form shortly after the conclusion of our show as well. And there'll also be clips on YouTube and social media. Give me a follow on Twitter at StoneShields_. Follow Chatterbox Sports on Twitter as well, and also follow the show on Twitter at The Stone Shields. But playoff baseball in full swing, and this kind of feels like the last great day of playoff baseball. Obviously, the championship series are going to be incredible, and if these divisional series continue to stay alive and teams don't clinch, those will still obviously be good there as well. But just the fact we get all this baseball here today, the 4 games, Seattle and Detroit, they played last night. They're playing again today. That rotation, we talk about the Cincinnati Reds rotation, but my goodness, the rotation for Seattle is real. They've got some dudes all over that team. Obviously, Cal Raleigh, J-Rod, Crawford there as well. They've got pitching, and they're playing like a confident bunch, and they look really good. Obviously, 8-4. Detroit was able to rally a little bit in the 9th inning, but the Mariners look absurd. And I think they're going to win today, and then they'll be playing in the LCS. To be completely honest with you, really impressed with what Seattle's been able to do. And the Yankees, how about it? I mentioned on Off the Bench, I have watched that clip of the Aaron Judge home run like 10 times. It's absolutely unbelievable. I'm not a Yankees fan at all. But, it felt like the Jays were going to get a sweep and run away with that series. And then sometimes, especially in the DS, with a best-of-5 situation, one swing is all it takes to completely change the momentum and the trajectory of that series. Not going to sit here and predict that the Yankees are going to come back. Obviously, if you watch the show, you know the Blue Jays are my pick to win the World Series. But, that swing from Aaron Judge, that's 100 in on his knuckles, and that was turned on, and it was gone. Off the foul pole. The clip's outstanding if you haven't seen it. The place absolutely explodes. Joe Davis, an incredible job on the call there as well. But that was by far his biggest moment of his postseason career. To me, you can say it's Ohtani. To me, Judge the best player in baseball, certainly the best hitter in baseball, but obviously he struggled in the postseason. That was his postseason moment, as Joe Davis alluded to there on the broadcast. But I don't know. They've got the young guy Schlittler going today. I don't even know if I said that name right, but something along those lines. They were struggling with the name as well on the post-game show there on Fox. But you never know, right? A swing like that from Judge, it can really put you back into a series. The Yankees are favorites to get a win today, and then we'll see before maybe the series goes back to Toronto for a Game 5. But that's going to be an incredible game here this afternoon as well. The Brewers have absolutely dominated the series against the Chicago Cubs. I picked the Cubs to upset the Brewers in that series. Obviously, it hasn't really transpired that way to this point. Jackson Chourio is a dog. Just an absolute dog. The Brewers were without him. He was hurt for much of the year, but he's back, and he's better than ever as he's really helped carrying their offense. The pitching has continued to be great for the Brewers there as well. Going to Wrigley, obviously here in a Game 3 situation, backs against the wall. I'm not going to back off my pick, right? I'll say the Cubs are going to win today, but certainly not as confident as I once was. And then how about the L.A. Dodgers? I think some Reds fans were here and all disappointed, saying, you got there, but, you just look completely not competitive against the Dodgers. Well, I tell you who else doesn't really look competitive. That's the Philadelphia Phillies, who many people think were the best team in baseball, perhaps going into the playoffs. Looks like they're going to get swept in this situation, to be completely honest with you, as they're in L.A. now. It's Yamamoto and Nola. Nola hasn't been nearly as good this year as he has in years past. Yamamoto was disgusting against the Reds, obviously. So, that's a big-time opportunity there for Yamamoto and the Dodgers, as they kind of, they struggle with their bullpen, obviously, and people kind of wrote them off a little bit. But, they've been guns blazing here in the postseason, as they obviously have not lost a playoff game yet. They've been unbelievable. I think they finished the job tonight, and they see what happens in Chicago, whether or not they're playing the Cubs or the Brewers. But maybe the Mariners or the Jays could beat them, but it's hard to imagine the Dodgers not, at least going back to the World Series here at this point. So great baseball games today, all four. Starts at 3:08 and then progresses throughout the evening and into the night as well, and finishes on the West Coast. I wanted to talk a little bit about Bill Belichick as the head coach of North Carolina. Obviously, he's out of coaching last year. People view him as the greatest coach of all time. I don't. Even before this, North Carolina thing started, I didn't. I think, to me, it's clearly Nick Saban. Obviously, Saban coached with Belichick, and Saban, in a lot of ways, is who he is because of working with Bill Belichick. I'm not naive to that. I completely understand that. But, there's the personality of Belichick, how he handles himself at the podium, just the curt nature, the nastiness with which he treated reporters, and certainly to some degree his players as well. That's fine when you're hoisting Lombardi trophies, but it gets old, and it gets old quickly when you're losing. And that is what happened at the tail end of his days in New England. Like, it got ugly a little bit for a couple of years, and then, Robert Kraft, he was like, all right, we'll cut bait. And that is after 6 world championships, right? You would think a guy that won 6 world championships, he could lose every single game for back-to-back years and not get fired. But, they were pretty early cutting bait with Bill Belichick there in New England. And then, everybody was like, he'll get another job. And then there was teams around the league. It's like, nope, we get you've won 6 Super Bowls. We get you've had all this success here at the professional level, but we're good. You want to come in, interview for a coordinator job? Yeah, maybe, but we don't have any interest in you being the head coach. And I think that was a big reality check for Bill of, I need to kind of do a 180 here and, reinvent myself a little bit if I'm ever going to get an opportunity to coach again in the NFL and be the head coach in the NFL. And then shocked a lot of people, shocked me that he takes the Carolina job. I think it was probably, the best collegiate job that was open, right? It's, a program with pretty good tradition, right? Obviously known as a basketball school, but a Power 4 team that is competing in a weak conference, so there was opportunity to come in and have some success immediately and win some games. But, I mean, some of the reports that are coming out, the parents are reportedly really fed up with him. I mean, imagine sending your 17, 18-year-old kid off to Bill Belichick to be coached. The guy, by the way, that's dating a kid, right? If we're just going to be completely honest here. I would have my reservations. I'm not a parent, obviously, but I would have my reservations doing that myself, right? And then when you couple it with losing, which is what's going on here in Carolina, it gets really, really bad really, really quickly. And you're in a spot where it's like, this might be a one-year thing with Bill Belichick, right? They get blown out in the first game against TCU, 48-14. They're able to beat Charlotte, but only score 20 points. They beat Richmond. Congrats. Get blown out by UCF. UCF's not a great team. And then Clemson, who had been, certainly a preseason top 5 team, but going, into that game, they had been upset several times and were spiraling downward, and they blow you out at your place 38-10. And then you look at the schedule going, Cal, you got Cal here, coming on the 17th. Cal's got a terrific young freshman quarterback on the road, traveling across the country. That could be a loss. Virginia's ranked, could be a loss. Syracuse is always feisty, could be a loss. Duke, rivalry game, they're better than you, could be a loss. Like, this thing could really begin to spiral on Bill Belichick and go down and continue to get worse and worse and worse. And this is just what happens. It doesn't matter the success that you've had in the past. When you're somebody that's genuinely unpleasant to be around, and that's Bill Belichick, people are going to turn on you quickly if you're losing football games. And this is just kind of the situation that Belichick finds himself in. Now, I'll give him some credit, right? He's obviously handling himself better at the podium than he did at New England. I think he understands that, I've got to be a bit more likable guy as he tries to kind of reinvent himself here. But, people compare him to Nick Saban. Nick Saban, he would get after the media if he didn't like a certain question, but he would give him time. He would give him well-thought-out answers. He respected the media. He was fun to be around, right? It's a guy that recruited young guys forever and did it better than anybody in the country. If he was just, a jerk, like that, I mean, that's what Bill Belichick is, just a jerk, right? That's how he acts. If Nick Saban was like that, do you think he would have had all these great recruits come play for him and have this success? No. Saban, of course, he could get after you, all right? He could be a little nasty at times. He could be a little angry at times. He could be a little mean at times. But he knew how to recruit. He knew how to relate to the young players, and that's why he had so much success. But this experiment here with Belichick in North Carolina, I didn't expect it to go well, but I didn't think it'd be this bad. I mean, just not competitive against Clemson, not competitive against UCF. Only scoring 20 points against Charlotte. And that was kind of the knock on him when Brady left. It's like, this guy's tone deaf to offense. Those New England teams after Brady left couldn't score. And you're seeing it now. He's had, multiple guys play at quarterback, kind of throwing Max Johnson back in the mix, who, I've always liked Max Johnson, but he's had some serious injuries. He's played at several different schools. And, he struggled, obviously, in the game there as well against Clemson. But, I mean, you just look at the personnel. The personnel on the field is not good enough with Bill Belichick out there. And frankly, it's not close. And that was kind of his issue towards the end in New England there as well. Obviously he was the GM there in New England, and he really struggled there. He had some good drafts earlier on in his career where he would get some steals, but it was just incompetence. You remember the one clip, obviously, that went viral of, a guy getting drafted and Sean McVay and Les Snead laughing about it, thinking, we thought this guy would be available rounds from now, and we were scouting him out and doing our due diligence on him, and Belichick goes out there and takes him in the first round. He just made several head-scratching decisions there from a personnel perspective, and you're seeing that here at the college level as well. Obviously, from a coaching perspective, it hasn't been good enough, but if you watch Carolina, they don't have enough dudes, right? And that's what you need in college. You got to have talent on your team. Right? It's not, coaching is a really big factor, but there's only so much you can get out of it, especially at the collegiate level, when there isn't as much parity as, for, say, the National Football League, where really coaching has an opportunity to really make a significant impact. Because for the most part, you've got the same caliber of players throughout all the teams. It's not like that in college. And look, it's hard. Nobody's had a ton of success besides Texas Tech about going into the portal, completely getting a whole new roster and just going and winning right away. So nobody really has been able to do it. But I didn't think it would be this bad in Carolina. And it's very much a friends and family staff, right? He's got, Lombardi, that's an NFL guy. He's got his kids on the staff. They're NFL people too as well. He's got Freddie Kitchens calling the plays, right? And Freddie Kitchens was flat out incompetent when he was in Cleveland, certainly. So they got a lot of NFL guys around there, and they all seem completely lost as it relates to college football. Whereas you have Matt Patricia, who's an NFL guy, but he's around a really good coach in Ryan Day and a college-oriented staff, and he's fit in perfectly, and he's done a tremendous job. Obviously, he has much better players than what they've got in Chapel Hill, but at the end of the day, this has just been a complete disaster for Bill Belichick, and I think a lot of people expected him to, have some success here and then potentially get an opportunity to return to the NFL down the line. It certainly is not going to happen here at this point, and I think you're asking a serious question of whether or not Carolina even asks him to come back next year, much less, whether he just wants to leave. Are they even going to invite him back as the head coach next year? We'll see. Obviously, still 7 games on the schedule. They do have a couple of wins, albeit against Charlotte and North Carolina. But, with these ACC games here on the horizon, we'll see what Belichick ultimately is able to do. Lastly, before we get out of here, Arch Manning, he hasn't obviously worked out the way that people thought. I think the expectation with Arch Manning, he was a Heisman favorite coming into the year. Texas was viewed as a team that could potentially win the national title, and obviously those two things are not happening here at this point, and he was viewed as a guy that could go number 1 overall in the draft, and that's not going to happen, at least this coming draft in April. Look, I'm not hitting the panic button fully on Arch Manning. I'll be the first to admit that I thought it would look a lot better than it does now. It does not, but I still think he can be a very successful quarterback at Texas and a very successful NFL quarterback as well. I truly do believe that, but the consistency hasn't been there from Arch Manning. The flashes have been there, and he was better against Florida than he was against Ohio State. I thought that he just needed to be okay against Florida, and that would have been enough to win the game. I didn't expect Florida to score 29 points. They did. Credit to them and Billy Napier and DJ Lagway for figuring it out there and scoring some points in that game. But he's got to be more consistent. There are some layups that he misses, right? There are some times where it's just a completely inaccurate pass that can't happen, especially if a guy is running wide open. But the spectacular, that has been there a little bit for Arch Manning. You see him extend, push the ball down the football field. He's done a good job at that in the past. Certainly against Florida, he was able to show that a little bit, but the consistency hasn't been there, and that's got to be something that is there for a guy to go first overall in the draft. I mean, nobody even views him as a top college quarterback at this point. Not even a top 10, probably not even a top 15 college quarterback, to be honest, right now. And Arch Manning. I think Sark can do a better job of setting him up with success. Florida has stunk going into that Texas game, but they still have, guys that are at Florida playing, right? They still have real guys on the defensive line, and the offensive line for Texas really struggled. He was under siege in that game. He was hit a lot in the game as well. And, I think when you're talking about Arch Manning, you have to understand that you have to look at him completely different at this point. You have to take off the fact that, he thought he was going to win the Heisman. He thought he was going to help lead Texas to a national title. That's not where they're at right now. We'll see how he plays throughout the rest of this season. He can't afford to regress, all right? He can't afford to completely lose his confidence, as I think you saw that for the couple of weeks there where it was like, he's lost some of his confidence. I didn't think that was the case against Florida, but he made some mistakes in the game that ultimately he wasn't able to overcome, and that certainly hurt him and hurt his football team. And, we'll see if going forward he's able to get some of those things cleaned up. I still think he can be a really good college quarterback, and I still think next year, and maybe he still has multiple years of eligibility. He could still be there. Obviously, he's going to be there next year, but he could even be there the year after that. We'll see. And I don't think Sark's going to quit on him. I think that would be a mistake for him to do that. But they got to be a lot better around him, and Sark's got to be a lot better. I think people want to put Sark up there with Kirby Smart and Ryan Day and Dan Lanning, and I like Sark, but he doesn't belong up there. He hasn't proven that he can do it at that type of level, and I think he can do a better job of putting Arch in some better positions as well. They've got Oklahoma this week. Really intrigued to see how he plays in that game. Obviously, his first time as the starter in Red River, and that Oklahoma defense, Venables, they'll get after you. and we'll see how he handles that. So certainly has been a disappointing season to this point for Arch Manning and the Texas Longhorns. But that'll do it for this edition of the Stone Shield Show. Appreciate everybody hanging out with us throughout the duration of the program. Again, breaking news if you missed it, Lucas Patrick going to probably play this week against Green Bay as he was cleared for practice. Jermaine Pratt signing with the Indianapolis Colts, and of course the Bengals trading for Joe Flacco, and the plan is for him to play on Sunday against the Green Bay Packers, and we're certainly looking forward to that. Plenty of exciting stuff to come throughout the remainder of the week. Got Thursday Night Football tomorrow. We'll preview that. Obviously, the Philadelphia Eagles and the New York Giants. Incredible week of college football that we'll preview. We'll have our bets the weekend on Friday. We'll try to get a guest on tomorrow, see if Reed Mouse is available or not. And plenty of exciting things coming your way right here at the show. Appreciate everyone, as always, for tuning in, and we'll talk to you later on tomorrow morning. Take care, everybody.